Dad perfect events. The needle hidden in my retirement watch was smaller than a grain of rice, but it would have killed me in 3 minutes. My wife of 32 years had it custom made, along with a loving engraving, Trevor Pierce, time well served. If my dead brother hadn't warned me in a dream, I'd be dead instead of telling you this story. I'm Trevor Pierce, 57 years old, and I've been an insurance adjuster for 32 years. I deal with facts, evidence, and people trying to scam the system every day. I don't believe in ghosts or dreams or any supernatural nonsense. But when my brother Bradley showed up in my dream 3 nights before my wife tried to murder me, it felt different. It felt real. Bradley had been dead for 4 years, died of what the doctors called sudden cardiac arrest while we were fishing up at Lake Superior. He was only 53, healthy as a horse, no history of heart problems. Just dropped dead on the dock with his fishing rod still in his hand. Carol had been there that weekend too, she'd suggested. The trip, actually? In the dream, Bradley was standing at the end of that same dock, wearing the flannel shirt he died in. Trevor, he said, using my full name like he always did when he was serious. Don't wear the watch she gave you, check the watch. Then he pointed to something in the water, and when I looked down, I saw my own reflection, but I looked dead. I woke up sweating through my sheets. Carol was already downstairs making coffee, humming some old Fleetwood Mac song, like she always does in the morning. We'd been married 32 years, since we were both in our early 20s. I thought I knew everything about her, every habit, every quirk, every dream. Turns out, I didn't know her at all. It was the morning of my retirement party. After 3 decades of investigating insurance claims, catching fraudsters, and dealing with people at their worst moments, I was finally done. 57 years old, full pension, decent savings account, and plans to take it easy for the first time in my adult life. Carol had been planning this party for months, rented the VFW hall, invited everyone we knew, ordered a cake with my picture on it, wearing a hard hat from my early days doing property damage claims. That morning, she surprised me with the watch. Beautiful piece, stainless steel submariner style with a blue face, came in a fancy wooden box with certificates of authenticity. Custom made by some artisan in Colorado, must have cost her $6,000, easy. Carol, this is too much, I said, and I meant it. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. Insurance adjuster salary is decent. I've worked my way up to senior investigator over the years, but it's not luxury watch money. You deserve it, she said, kissing my cheek. 32 years of hard work. Now, you finally get to enjoy yourself. But when I held that watch, something felt wrong. Maybe it was Bradley's warning rattling around in my head, or maybe it was 3 decades of training myself to spot things that don't add up. The weight distribution was off, just slightly heavier than it should be, and when I touched the crown to set the time, I swear I felt something that didn't belong there. The party that night was everything Carol had promised. 150 people showed up, guys from the office, neighbors, friends from church. Even our son Leonard, who flew in from Denver, with his wife and our 2 granddaughters. Margaret and Patricia are 7 and 9 years old, and they climbed all over me the minute they walked in, showing me pictures they'd drawn of Grandpa at work, complete with magnifying glass and detective hat. Carol worked that room like a professional hostess. She'd always been good at that. Social, charming, the perfect insurance man's wife, who smiled through my long hours and never complained when I had to work weekends on big cases. She wore a red dress I'd never seen before and looked younger than her 54 years. I noticed she'd lost a lot of weight too, maybe 20 pounds since Christmas. You look fantastic, honey, I told her during a quiet moment between congratulations. Oh, I've been working with a personal trainer, she said, her eyes lighting up. Nathan Rodriguez. He's been amazing. Really pushed me these past 6 months. 6 months. That's exactly when she'd started suggesting I should take some time off after retirement. Maybe go on that fishing trip to Canada I'd been talking about for years. You need to decompress, she'd said more than once. Transition slowly into retirement. My old partner Glenn spent 20 minutes examining that watch. Glenn's been with the company almost as long as I have, worked fraud cases in 3 different states. This is serious equipment, Trevor, he said, holding it up to the light. She must really love you. 32 years, I said. We've had our ups and downs, but we always figure it out. Glenn nodded. That's what real marriage looks like, working through the tough times. If only I'd known how tough things were about to get. That night, after everyone went home and Carol headed upstairs, I sat in my garage workshop with the watch. I told myself I just wanted to get familiar with it, maybe adjust the band to fit better, but really, I wanted to prove Bradley's dream wrong. I wanted to convince myself I was being paranoid. I have good tools in my garage, professional equipment I've accumulated over 32 years of insurance investigations, jeweler's loop, precision screwdrivers, digital calipers. When you spend 3 decades examining damaged property and figuring out how accidents really happened, you learn to look at things carefully. I started with a basic visual inspection under my workbench light. The watch looked perfect, professional craftsmanship, flawless finishing. But that weight issue was still bothering me. I used my digital scale to weigh it against specs I found online for similar timepieces. It was 3.2 grams heavier than it should be. That's when I noticed something else. The crown, the little knob you use to set the time, felt different when I turned it. There was a slight resistance that shouldn't be there, and when I pressed it in, I felt something that definitely didn't belong. I used my jeweler's loop to examine the crown mechanism. That's when I saw it. A tiny hole, smaller than a pinhead, right where the crown meets the case. So small I'd missed it on first inspection, but definitely there. My hands started shaking a little, not from fear, from recognition. I'd seen something like this before, about 8 years ago, in a case involving a businessman who died of mysterious heart failure. His business partner had collected a nice life insurance payout, but the family suspected foul play. We never found enough evidence to prosecute, but I always suspected that guy had found a way to make murder look natural. Very carefully, using my precision tools, I removed the back case of the watch. What I found inside made my blood turn to ice. Someone had installed a micro-injection system inside. The crown mechanism? Tiny spring-loaded needle connected to a minuscule reservoir holding maybe 0.5 milliliter of clear liquid. When you press the crown, presumably to set the time, the needle would extend just enough to penetrate the skin on your wrist and inject whatever was in that reservoir. I had a glucose testing kit in my workshop. Bought it a couple years back when my doctor said my blood sugar was getting high. I used one of the test strips on the liquid in the reservoir. The reading came back as pure glucose, but in massive concentration. This wasn't glucose for treating low blood sugar. This was insulin, concentrated insulin, enough to drop a healthy man's blood glucose so fast it would cause unconsciousness in minutes and death shortly after. And it would look exactly like a heart attack, just like Bradley. I sat there in my garage for a long time, staring at that watch. 32 years of investigating insurance fraud had taught me to recognize attempted murder when I saw it. But I'd never imagined I'd be the target. The sophistication of this thing was incredible. Professional work. The kind of precision engineering that takes real skill and equipment. And the insulin. That was clever. It metabolizes quickly. Wouldn't show up in a standard autopsy unless they specifically tested for it. Who's going to examine a watch when a 57-year-old man dies of an apparent heart attack? My hands weren't shaking anymore. Now I was angry. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything with my camera. Close-ups of the mechanism, measurements of the components, video of how the injection system worked. I even managed to extract a small sample of the insulin for testing. Then I put everything back together exactly as I'd found it. When I finally went upstairs, it was almost 5 a.m. Carol was asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in our bedroom doorway for a long time, looking at this woman I'd spent more than half my life with, who'd raised our son Leonard with, me, who'd held my hand at Bradley's funeral and told me everything would be okay. She'd tried to kill me. The question was why, and who'd helped her build that thing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I went to my home office and started doing what I do best, investigating. Bank statements, credit card bills, life insurance policies. After 32 years in the business, I know where to look. The life insurance was the first red flag. Carol had increased my policy 8 months ago, right around the time she'd started with that personal trainer. Increased it from $500,000 to $1.8 million. I didn't remember signing anything, but there was my signature, or something that looked like my signature. She'd been signing my name on Christmas cards for years. She'd gotten good at copying my handwriting. I dug deeper into our credit card statements. Regular charges to something called Elite Fitness Solutions. That must be where she'd been working out with Nathan. But the amounts were strange. $600 one month, $550 the next, then $680. Those weren't normal gym membership fees. Those were payments for something else. I have access to some investigative databases through my work. Technically, I'm supposed to only use them for insurance cases, but this felt like the biggest insurance case of my life. I ran searches on Nathan Rodriguez and found exactly what I expected to find. 45 years old, personal trainer, and fitness instructor. But more interesting were his previous relationships. 3 documented instances over the past 10 years where he dated older women who'd recently come into significant money. 1 inheritance, 1 divorce settlement, 1 life insurance payout. He'd never been charged with anything, but the pattern was clear. Nathan Rodriguez was a professional predator who specialized in middle-aged women with money, but he couldn't have built that watch mechanism. That took real technical skill. I needed to find out who'd helped them. I used an old software tool from work to access Carol's email. I'm not proud of breaking into my wife's private communications, but after 32 years in fraud investigation, I have certain skills. Her password was easy, our wedding anniversary. What I found in her, sent and deleted folders, made me physically sick. Months of emails between Carol and Nathan Rodriguez. Not just trainer-client communications, love letters, explicit photos. Detailed plans for a future together. Once this is done, 1 email from 6 weeks ago read, "We'll have everything we need. $1.8 million is enough for us to disappear to Costa Rica. He'll never suspect anything. He's too trusting, too focused on work to pay attention to what's really happening." Another email from Nathan to Carol. "You're sure about the timing? It has to look natural." "Al says the device is foolproof," Carol had replied. "He's tested it multiple times. Insulin shock presents exactly like cardiac arrest. Just make sure Trevor wears the watch regularly so it doesn't seem suspicious when it happens." Al. I searched for that name in all her communications. Albert Morrison, a precision watchmaker she'd met at some craft fair last spring. Their email exchanges were technical, discussions about needle mechanisms, insulin delivery systems, spring tensions, and most importantly, how to make murder look like natural causes. So, there were 3 of them. My wife of 32 years, tired of being married to an insurance adjuster who worked too much and didn't make enough money. A predatory personal trainer looking for his next wealthy victim. And a skilled craftsman willing to build a murder weapon for the right price. I sat there watching the sunrise through my office window, thinking about Bradley, about how he died with Carol right there, supposedly trying to help him, about how she'd been the one who'd suggested that fishing trip, about how she'd held my hand at his funeral and cried real tears. She'd killed my brother to practice, to see if she could live with herself afterwards, to test whether Albert's method really worked. Then she'd waited 4 years to try it on me. The patient, calculating coldness of it was almost impressive. If I wasn't the target, I might have admired the planning. I should have called the police right then. Should have turned over everything I'd found and let them handle it. But 32 years of investigating insurance fraud had taught me something important about the legal system. You need evidence that will stick. You need to catch them in the act. You need a case so airtight that no defense attorney can poke holes in it. I spent the next 2 days playing the role of happy retiree. I wore that watch everywhere, made sure Carol saw me checking the time, talked about how much I loved her gift. "Best retirement present ever," I told her over breakfast. "I'll never take it off." She smiled and kissed my cheek. "I'm so glad you like it, honey. Be careful with it, though. It's irreplaceable." I bet it was. Irreplaceable. Probably took Albert weeks to engineer that injection mechanism. On the second day, I made my move. I called Glenn, my old partner from work. We'd been investigating fraud cases together for 15 years before he transferred to the corporate office. If anyone would believe my story and help me build a case, it was Glenn. "I need a favor," I told him when we met for coffee at our usual diner. "Off the books." Glenn looked at me over his coffee cup. We'd been through enough cases together that he could read my moods. "What kind of favor, Trevor?" I slid him a flash drive across the table. Everything's on there. Photos, emails, financial records. If something happens to me in the next few weeks, take this to the state police. "What the hell is going on?" "Insurance fraud," I said. "The biggest case of my career. and I'm the intended victim. I gave him the basics: the watch, the insulin mechanism, the conspiracy between Carol, Nathan, and Albert. Glenn listened without interrupting, his investigator's mind processing the information. "You're sure about this?" he asked finally. 32 years of experience, sure. Glenn nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Surveillance, documentation, and backup when I set the trap." I used my professional contacts to run deeper background checks on Nathan Rodriguez and Albert Morrison. Nathan's pattern was even clearer when I looked at the details. 3 previous relationships with older women over the past 12 years. Each relationship had lasted 8 to 12 months. Each woman had increased her life insurance shortly before entering the relationship. Each woman had died of apparent natural causes: 2 heart attacks, 1 stroke. Nathan had inherited money in 2 cases and been named as beneficiary on a life insurance policy in the 3rd. He'd never been charged because the deaths looked natural, and he'd been smart enough to vary his methods and locations. But the pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. Albert Morrison was more interesting. 48 years old, divorced, precision watchmaker, and jewelry repair specialist. 1 previous arrest for insurance fraud 6 years ago. He'd been caught filing false claims for stolen jewelry that he'd actually sold. Charges were dropped when he cooperated and returned the money, but it showed he was willing to commit fraud for the right price. More importantly, Albert had the skills to build what I'd found in that watch: precision engineering, knowledge of micromechanisms, access to specialized tools. He was the technical brains of the operation. I set my trap carefully. I told Carol I wanted to take that fishing trip to Canada we had talked about, get away for a week to really start adjusting to retirement. She loved the idea. "You deserve it," she said. "Take some time for yourself. I'll hold things down here." "Why don't you have Nathan come over while I'm gone?" I suggested casually. "You could keep up with your training routine. I don't want to bother him," she said, but not quickly enough. "No bother at all. In fact, why don't you both drive up and meet me for the last couple days? There's a nice lodge near the lake. You could surprise me. We could have dinner together. I'd love to finally meet this miracle worker who's gotten you in such great shape." I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was thinking about timing, about me being alone in the Canadian wilderness for 5 days first, about the accident happening before they arrived to discover my body. "That sounds wonderful," she said finally. "Let me check with Nathan about his schedule." The night before I left, Carol made my favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the way her mother had taught her when we were first married. We sat at our kitchen table like we had thousands of times over 32 years, making small talk about my trip, about her plans while I was gone. She poured wine, a nice Cabernet she'd been saving for a special occasion. I pretended to drink mine, but dumped it in the kitchen sink when she went to get dessert. After finding that watch mechanism, I wasn't taking any chances with anything she gave me. "I'm going to miss you," she said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. I looked at her face, trying to figure out when she'd stopped being my wife and started being a stranger planning my murder. "I'll miss you too," I said. And strangely, I meant it. I would miss who I'd thought she was. I didn't go to Canada. Instead, I drove to a remote cabin that belonged to Tom Harrison, a retired investigator from our Detroit office. I'd helped Tom with a complex arson case about 5 years back, and he owed me a favor. "I need to borrow your place for a week," I'd told him, "and I need you not to ask questions." "Done," he'd said. "Keys are under the back deck." The cabin was perfect for what I had planned. Isolated, no neighbors for miles, surrounded by thick woods. Most importantly, it had a clear view of the access road from the front windows. Glenn arrived the morning after I did, bringing surveillance equipment and 2 detectives from the State Police Insurance Fraud Unit. I called Carol that first night, told her I'd arrived safely and the fishing was fantastic. "Caught a northern pike this morning, must have been 18 inches. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so glad you're relaxing. How are things at home?" "Quiet without you. I might call Nathan tomorrow, see if he wants to do a training session." "You should. You've been working so hard to get in shape." On day 3, Glenn called with an update. "Your wife just bought 3 plane tickets to Duluth. Her, Nathan Rodriguez, and someone named Albert Morrison. They land tomorrow afternoon." "Perfect." They were coming to make sure their plan worked, probably to discover my body and play the grieving widow and concerned friends. "One more thing," I told Glenn. "Set up the recording equipment. I want everything documented when they get here. They arrived the next afternoon in a rental, SUV. I watched from inside the cabin as they parked and walked toward the front door. Carol carried an overnight bag. Nathan had what looked like camping gear. Albert carried a small toolbox, probably to retrieve the watch and dispose of evidence after they found my body. I let them get all the way to the front porch before I opened the door. "Surprise," I said, stepping outside with my hands visible and empty. Carol's face went white. Nathan immediately started backing toward the car. Albert just stood there holding his toolbox like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Trevor," Carol stammered, "what are you doing here? I thought you went to Canada, change of plans." "Decided to stay closer to home." I held up my wrist, showing them the watch. "Gave me more time to really appreciate your retirement gift. Want to see how well it works?" That's when Nathan bolted. He made it about 20 yards before Glenn and Detective Martinez stepped out of the woods. They had been waiting in position since dawn. Albert dropped his toolbox and put his hands up immediately. "I didn't want to do this," he said. "She made me. Said it was just to scare him, not actually hurt anyone." Carol tried to play innocent. "I don't understand what's happening. We just came to surprise you." "With a murder weapon disguised as a retirement gift," I said. I carefully removed the watch and handed it to Detective Martinez. "Be very careful with the crown mechanism. It's loaded with enough concentrated insulin to kill a horse." The trial took 9 months. I sat through every day of it, watching Carol's lawyers try to paint me as a controlling husband who'd driven her to desperation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the insurance fraud, Albert's detailed testimony about building the injection mechanism, and Bradley's exhumed body showing trace insulin markers that the original autopsy had missed. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Carol got life without parole for 2 counts of first-degree murder. Nathan got 25 years. Albert got 15 years in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. Our son Leonard hasn't spoken to me since the trial ended. He believes his mother's story, thinks I somehow set her up, that I should have just divorced her if I was unhappy. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should have paid more attention to what was happening in my own house instead of focusing so much on work. I'm 58 now. I live in a smaller place closer to town, sold the old house because I couldn't stand being there anymore. I do consulting work for insurance companies, help them spot the kind of fraud I spent 32 years learning to recognize. Turns out, there's good money in knowing how people try to beat the system. The girls, Margaret and Patricia, still send me birthday cards and drawings. Leonard doesn't know. His wife secretly gives them my address. They're 9 and 11 now, growing up without really understanding why Grandma disappeared and why they only see Grandpa a couple times a year. Some nights I still dream about Bradley. He doesn't talk in these dreams anymore. He just nods, like he's satisfied that justice was finally done. Like he knows his warning saved my life. Last month I went to Bradley's grave for the first time since the trial. I brought coffee. He always loved terrible gas station coffee that could strip paint. I got them, I told him, all 3 of them. They'll never hurt anyone else. The wind picked up through the cemetery trees, and for just a moment, I swear I heard his laugh. That's why now, when people tell me about strange dreams or gut feelings they can't explain, I tell them this: listen, pay attention. Bradley saved my life from beyond the grave, and your instincts might be the only thing standing between you and someone who's supposed to love you. Trust your gut, check the details, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful gifts come with the deadliest intentions. After 32 years investigating fraud, I learned that the biggest cons aren't pulled by strangers, they're pulled by the people sleeping next to you, eating dinner with you, sharing your dreams, and planning your funeral. The deadliest lies come wrapped in wedding rings and anniversary gifts, told by voices that whisper, "I love you" every night, while calculating how much your life is worth.